I didn't send you a keychain. Aunt Beatrix's voice silenced the entire room. She didn't look at me. She stared straight at my father, Richard, her eyes cold and deadly. I bought Jessica the deed to the $1.2 million penthouse downtown, she announced, pointing at the cheap piece of metal in my hand. So tell me, Richard, why is your daughter sitting at the kids' table holding a $5 trinket while Caitlin is living in the home I paid for? Caitlin dropped her wine glass. It didn't just break. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. My father opened his mouth to speak, but he looked like he was choking. Beatrix stood up, leaning over the table. I want the keys, Richard, right now, before I tell you whose name was actually on that deed, and what my father did when the police arrived. Drop a comment below. What's the most toxic thing a family member has ever done to you during the holidays? I want to know I'm not alone. For a heartbeat, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator. Then Caitlin laughed. It was a high, brittle sound, like glass breaking under a heel. "Oh my God, Aunt Beatrix," she said, waving a manicured hand. "You've had too much wine. You're confusing everyone. That apartment is a rental. Dad knows about it, right, Dad?" She looked at my father, Richard, her eyes wide and pleading. She was begging him to construct the lie for her, just like he always did. And he tried. He really tried. He stood up, wiping his mouth with a napkin, trying to regain control of his perfect Christmas dinner. "Beatrix, this isn't the time," he said, his voice low and warning. "We can discuss financial matters later. Let's not ruin the evening." Ruin the evening? That was always his priority. Not the truth, not justice, just the appearance of peace. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. It was the feeling of a tether finally snapping. I stood up from the kids' table, pushing my folding chair back. "Sit down, Jessica," my stepmother Monica hissed. I ignored her. I walked past the main table, past the turkey, past Caitlin's terrified smile. I picked up the remote for the 85-inch television mounted above the fireplace. My father had bought it last month, another toy he claimed he couldn't afford when I needed help with rent. "Jessica, put that down," my father commanded. I didn't answer. I pulled out my phone. Aunt Beatrix had given me access to the smart home system 5 minutes before we sat down to eat. I tapped the screen once. Cast to device. The image of the fireplace log loop vanished from the TV. In its place, a high-definition, wide-angle security feed filled the room. It was the penthouse. My penthouse. The audio kicked in a second later, thumping bass and screaming laughter. The living room was packed with people. I recognized the few of Caitlin's influencer friends. One guy was standing on the white marble island in his shoes, spraying champagne over the kitchen. Another girl was using a credit card to cut lines of white powder on the glass coffee table. But the worst part was the sofa. My father's vintage white leather sofa, which he had loaned to Caitlin for her rental. A girl in a red dress was spilling wine all over it, laughing as the dark stains spread like a gunshot wound across the pristine leather. "Oops," the girl on the screen shrieked. "Caitlin's dad is going to kill us." "Whatever," the guy on the counter yelled back. "Her dad pays for everything anyway." In the dining room, the silence was absolute. Caitlin's face had gone the color of ash. She stared at the screen, watching her secret life broadcast in 4K resolution to the people she had spent years manipulating. "Turn it off!" she screamed, scrambling out of her chair. "Turn it off right now! That's private!" "Private?" I asked, my voice calm. "It's not private, Caitlin. It's a crime scene." I looked at my father. He was staring at the TV, his mouth open, watching the guy on the counter kick a vase off the ledge. It shattered. "Dad," I said, "look closely. That is my house. Those are your antiques being destroyed." I tapped my phone screen again, bringing up the dialer. "And just so you know," I said, holding the phone up so they can all see the numbers, "I just dialed 911. I didn't wait for the police to arrive at the dinner table. I walked out. Aunt Beatrice followed me, her heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the driveway. We got into my beat-up sedan, the one Caitlin refused to ride in because it smelled like poverty. I turned the key, and as the engine sputtered to life, the adrenaline that had fueled my explosion began to cool into something harder, something like ice. I drove toward downtown, toward the penthouse. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was drifting. It wasn't drifting to the future, to the confrontation waiting for me. It was drifting back, specifically to 3 months ago, to 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I remembered the smell first. Sour wine, expensive perfume, vomit. My phone had rung in the middle of the night. It was my father. "Jessica, you need to go to the condo," he'd said, his voice frantic. "Caitlin's maid quit. She has a photo shoot in the morning and the place is a disaster. She's hysterical. Please just go help your sister." I went because that's what I did. I was the fixer, the eraser, the one they called when the golden child made a mess she couldn't smile her way out of. I remember kneeling on that white marble floor, the same floor I had just seen on the security feed. I was scrubbing a red wine stain out of a white rug with club soda and a toothbrush. Caitlin was sitting on the counter eating a yogurt, scrolling through Instagram. She didn't say thank you. She didn't even look at me. She just pointed with her spoon and said, "You missed a spot by the sofa. If that doesn't come out, you're paying for it." I looked up at her, my knees aching, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. "Caitlin, I have to be at work in 4 hours." "So go," she shrugged. "Nobody asked you to be so slow." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the rag at her, but I didn't. I kept scrubbing. For years, I told myself I did it because I was the responsible one, because I was the big sister, but that was a lie. I did it because I had been trained to believe that my silence was the rent I paid to exist in this family. I thought if I cleaned enough messes, if I swallowed enough insults, if I made myself useful enough, eventually my father would look at me the way he looked at her. I thought servitude was the price of admission to love. Whatever connection I thought I was buying with my labor, it was a fraud. They didn't love me for fixing things. They loved that I fixed things so they didn't have to. I wasn't a daughter to Richard. I was a janitor. He didn't have to pay. "Jessica," Aunt Beatrice said softly from the passenger seat, pulling me back to the present. "You're gripping the wheel so hard your knuckles are white." I loosened my grip. The city skyline was coming into view. The building, my building, towered over the lesser structures, a spire of glass and steel. 3 months ago, I was on my knees scrubbing another woman's vomit off a floor I wasn't allowed to walk on. I was begging for a scrap of validation. I was a ghost in my own life. But tonight, I pressed my foot down on the gas. The engine roared louder than the doubts in my head. They broke me back then. They trained me to be silent. But they forgot that when you force someone to clean up your mess for 20 years, they learn exactly where all the dirt is hidden, and they learn how to dispose of the trash. "I'm fine, Aunt Beatrice," I said, my voice flat and calm. "I'm just going to inspect my property." I pulled up to the curb of the building, my tires screeching against the concrete. I didn't wait for the valet. I tossed the keys to the stunned doorman and sprinted for the elevators. Aunt Beatrice was right behind me, moving with a speed that belied her age. I knew something was wrong before the elevator doors even opened on the penthouse floor. I could hear it. It wasn't the bass of the music anymore. It was the sound of destruction, the wet crunch of glass shattering, the tearing of fabric, the high-pitched, rhythmic shrieking of someone who had lost their mind. I stepped out into the hallway. The front door to the unit was wide open. The lock hadn't been picked. It had been opened. My stomach dropped. I realized instantly, my father. He had an emergency physical key. He must have given it to her months ago, just in case the Wi-Fi went down. I walked through the doorway, and for a second I thought I was going to be sick. The penthouse wasn't just messy, it was being executed. Caitlin was standing in the middle of the living room. She was holding a heavy brass statue, an abstract piece my father had bought in Milan. She raised it over her head and brought it down onto the glass coffee table. The table exploded into 1,000 glittering shards. "It's mine!" she screamed, swinging the statue again, this time aiming for the wall-mounted shelving. "It's all mine!" She wasn't trying to salvage her belongings. She wasn't packing her bags. She was scorching the earth. I watched her tear the silk curtains off the rod, ripping the drywall out with them. I watched her grab a bottle of red wine and spin in a circle, spraying it over the white walls, the white carpet, the white leather chairs. It looked like a massacre. A normal person would look at this and see insanity. They would see a tantrum. But I looked at Caitlin, at her dilated pupils and the sweat matting her hair to her forehead, and I saw something else. I saw the extinction burst. In behavioral psychology, an extinction burst is what happens when a behavior that used to get a reward suddenly stops working. When the rat pushes the lever and no food comes out, it doesn't just walk away, it pushes the lever harder, it attacks the cage, it screams. For 23 years, Caitlin's lever was being the victim. If she cried, she got a car. If she threw a fit, she got a trip to Europe. If she failed, she got a penthouse. Tonight, for the first time in her life, she pushed the lever and nothing happened. No food, no praise, just a locked door in a dark room. So she was attacking the cage. "Caitlin," I said. My voice was calm, but it felt hollow, like I was speaking from underwater. She spun around. She looked deranged. Her mascara was running down her face in black rivulets. She pointed the neck of the broken wine bottle at me. "You did this?" she screamed. "You jealous, ugly, you ruined my brand. Do you know how many followers are DMing me right now? They think I'm a fraud." "You are a fraud. This is my house." She kicked a hole in the drywall. "If I can't live here, nobody can. I'll turn it into a dump. I'll make sure it smells like rot forever." She ran to the kitchen island and swept her arm across the counter, sending a row of expensive crystal vases crashing to the floor. It looked like defeat. It looked like I had won the battle for the deed, only to lose the war for the home. The damage was catastrophic. Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds. The floors were ruined, the art was destroyed, the furniture was garbage. My inheritance was being erased in real time. I looked at Aunt Beatrice. She was standing by the door, her face pale, her hand over her mouth. She looked at me, waiting for me to intervene, to tackle her, to stop the bleeding. But I didn't move. I didn't step forward to grab the bottle from Caitlin's sand. I didn't try to reason with a hurricane. I just watched. I let her break the lamp. I let her slash the sofa. I let her dig the hole deeper and deeper until there was no way she could ever climb out. "Are you done?" I asked, my voice cutting through the noise of shattering glass. Caitlin panted, heaving for breath. She looked around at the devastation she had caused. And for a split second, I saw a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought she had hurt me. She thought she had destroyed my prize. She didn't realize she had just handcrafted the shackles I was about to put on her wrists. I stood in the doorway, the frame cold against my shoulder. I didn't step inside. I didn't need to. The destruction was complete. It wasn't just a party gone wrong. It was an annihilation. Caitlin stood panting in the center of the wreckage, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. She was waiting for me to scream. She was waiting for me to tackle her, to beg her to stop, to validate her tantrum with my own hysteria. Instead, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I didn't call my father. I didn't call my stepmother. I dialed 3 numbers. 911. "What is your emergency?" "I need to report felony vandalism in progress," I said, my voice steady. "I am the property owner. The intruder is still on the premises. She is currently destroying the interior with a blunt object." Caitlin froze. The brass statue hung loose in her hand. "You're calling the cops?" she scoffed, though her voice wavered. "On your sister? God, you are so dramatic. Dad'll just fix it." "My address is 4500 Skyline Boulevard, Penthouse Unit 4B. Yes, she is armed with a heavy metal object. She appears to be under the influence." "I am not under the influence," Caitlin shrieked. She dropped the statue. It landed with a dull thud on the ruined rug. "Hang up, Jessica. Hang up right now." The elevator chimed behind me. The doors slid open, and my father, Richard, stumbled out. He was out of breath, his face red and slick with sweat. He must have run past the doorman. He saw me standing in the hall, phone to my ear. He saw the open door. He saw the carnage inside. "Jessica," he gasped, grabbing my arm. "Don't! Please, just hang up." "Officers are dispatched," the dispatcher said in my ear. "Stay on the line." "Dad," I said, pulling my arm away, "look at your daughter." Richard looked past me. He saw Caitlin standing amid the shattered glass and torn drywall. He saw the red wine dripping down the white walls like blood. He saw the absolute ruin of $1 million asset. Caitlin shrieked that I had ruined her life, but the damage around us said otherwise. Sirens closed in, and my father begged me to call it a misunderstanding. He kept insisting she was young, that it was just furniture, and that her record would destroy her image. I told him the truth. She did this to herself. Police arrived. I handed over the deed and filed charges. My father tried to block them, threatening to disown me if I went through with it. For the first time, I didn't care. I told the officers to remove him from my property. Caitlin was cuffed, screaming. My father pulled out his checkbook, frantic to fix everything, until Aunt Beatrice arrived with receipts showing $200,000 in structural damage. Then she produced what broke him completely, the guarantor agreement he had signed, making him legally liable for every cent. He stared at the paper like it was a death sentence. He whispered he was trying to help, but enabling isn't helping. It's debt, and the bill finally came due. Caitlin was taken away. My father slumped to the floor, panicked about losing everything. I told him plainly he would pay for all of it, and he did, selling assets, raiding retirement, writing the checks himself. 3 weeks later, the apartment was repaired. My taste, my choices, my name on the deed. I deleted their access codes, poured a glass of wine, and sat alone on my balcony. Dad texted about Caitlin's court date. I blocked him. For 32 years, I cleaned up after them. That night, the cleaning ended. I didn't just rebuild my home. I reclaimed my life.